Hi, welcome to my channel. My name is Anne and today I'm giving you my June wrap-up. I was about to say May because at the end of my May wrap-up I told you about my goal, which was to have read 50 books so far this year by the end of June, and that meant that I had to read 13 books in June, which is a lot for me. I never read that many books in a month. I think the most I read at that point was 11, which was in May, but I did manage to read 13 books in June. That also means that this wrap-up will be very long if I spend a large amount of time on every book, as I usually do, and I also really don't feel like doing that. I feel like doing a quick fire wrap-up, so that's what I'm going to attempt to do in this video. So without any further ado, let's get into it. The first book I finished in June was Book Lovers by Emily Henry, and I loved this book. I gave it 5 stars. It's one of my favorite books I've read so far this year. This is a romance novel about Charlie and Nora. Nora is a literary agent in New York and Charlie is a literary editor in New York, and they are kind of somewhat professional enemies. They don't like each other and then they end up in the same place during the summer, and of course a romance ensues. It's about much more than the romance though. It's also about trauma. It's about family and family relationships. There's a lot to it, and this book has cemented Emily Henry as probably my favorite romance writer. The next book I read was Jane, the Vos en Ik by Fanny Britt and Isabelle Arsenault. This is a middle grade graphic novel, I think, and the title translates to Jane, the Fox and I. This was originally written in French, and it is about a young girl who is bullied at school, and she finds solace in the book Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. It's about her going through life, not really liking her life. Her life is a bit grey and drab, as you can see in these pictures, and towards the end it gains some more color as she meets some friends. This was not that great, to be honest. I gave it 3 stars. I didn't love it. It was enjoyable. I was a bit disappointed by it because it seemed to be over very quickly. There wasn't enough time to really develop a character or a story, which was a bit of a pity, and I also didn't really like the art style. Next up I read Saga Volume 4 by Brian K. Vaughan and Fiona Staples. This is the 4th volume in a 9-volume series. I thought there were many more than that, but I actually found out yesterday that there are only 9 of them, which changes my feelings towards the series a little bit, because I thought there was pretty much an endless amount of volumes and that I would have to spend a lot of money to read them all. And that was kind of my problem with this series, is that it is an ongoing story, and by the time I really get into the volume and get back into the characters, the story, the world, which is quite extensive, it is already over, and then if I want to read on, I have to buy the next volume straight away, which I usually don't feel like doing because graphic novel volumes are quite expensive. And that's kind of my dilemma with this series, because I really like it. I love the world, I like the characters, they are great, but do I love them enough to invest so much money in it is basically the question. I ended up giving this volume 3.75 stars. I enjoyed this considerably more than I did the previous volume. I loved being back with the core characters of this story, and I do really enjoy this world. Next up I read another graphic novel, and a very short one. It was A Quick and Easy Guide to Asexuality by Molly Muldoon and Will Hernandez. I gave this 3 stars. It was a little bit disappointing, to be honest. First of all, the artwork is very simple and it's just kind of pictures of them explaining things instead of really a story. I didn't think it was that special what they were telling. I think this can be very useful to people who don't know much about asexuality or nothing at all, and they want to learn more about it because they have people in their family or their friendship groups who are asexual, or people who are really just discovering their sexuality. But as someone who is asexual and has known it for not that long but a little while and has read about it some more, this didn't really add anything. And there was one thing that I thought was particularly not good, and that is the fact that at some point they discuss the A in LGBTQIA+, and the A stands for asexuality, but a lot of people still think that it stands for ally. And they had the perfect opportunity here to say that no, A is for asexuality, it isn't for ally. And instead they talked about, well, maybe it's asexuality, but maybe it is actually ally. And I thought this was a good moment to really make a point of this, but they didn't, and it felt not very good. So yeah. Next up I listened to the audiobook for Love That Story by Jonathan Van Ness. I also listened to an audiobook by Jonathan Van Ness last month, which was his first book, Over the Top, which was really his memoir, talking about him growing up, his trauma, about everything he went through. It was very hard-hitting and a very good read. It was narrated by him himself, as was this book, which was very enjoyable. And this was still very personal. It's still about him, but it is also a little bit more about social justice, about activism. I learned a lot from it about different things, such as how AIDS was managed in the 80s and later on in America. I learned about the war on drugs. I learned just how deeply embedded the racism and discrimination towards black and brown people in America is, and how that developed in the previous century. So it was still personal, it was very educational. I really enjoyed it. I gave it 4 stars. Next up, I read a Dutch graphic novel, and it's called De Philosoof, de Hond en de Bruiloft, which translates to The Philosopher, the Dog and the Wedding, and it's written by Barbara Stock. This is a graphic novel about the first female philosopher, Hipparchia. I'm not really sure what her name is in English, but she really existed in ancient Greece, in Athens. And this is her story about how she came to be a philosopher, about how being a woman influenced her life. I really loved this. I gave it 4 stars. It was very enjoyable. The artwork is also really good. It's seemingly very simple, but it really evokes a lot of emotion with only a few pen strokes. So that was really good as well. Then I listened to another Dutch book. I've noticed that ever since I started working at a bookstore, I'm actually leaning more towards reading Dutch books than I've ever done since my childhood. I used to never read any Dutch books, and in this month alone I think I've read 3 or maybe even 4. The next book that I listened to was Waarom vrouwen minder werken dan mannen by Lisbeth Staats, and this title translates to Why Women Work Less Than Men, and it's really focusing on the Netherlands and how there are many more women working part-time here than in the rest of Europe. For example, it really goes into that. It goes into the lack of equality. It goes into the income inequality between men and women. It's really about the cultural tendencies that have ensured that women are working less than men, and that they are expected to care for their children once they are born, and they are expected to start working less even if they did work full-time before. And it was an interesting read, but in the end I ended up giving it 3 stars because to me it really focused on the fact that working full-time should be the ideal, that is the thing to strive for all people, that is what you should want as a woman. And she does mention the fact that not everyone wants to work full-time, but she really does present working full-time as the ideal and as the thing that will bring us equality. And as someone who works part-time, partly by choice, partly because my mental health doesn't really allow me to work full-time, but mostly also by choice, I thought this was really annoying because I've noticed a tendency among my generation, in the Netherlands at least, that working full-time is no longer really the thing everyone wants. I'm noticing more and more people my age start to work part-time because they do want to earn money, because you want to be able to live, but you also want to do fun things to really enrich your life in a way that doesn't happen through work. I'm working 24 hours a week. I don't want to work more because I'm enjoying my job a lot, but I don't want that to be everything in my life. There is more to do. I want to make videos. I want to be able to read. I want to write. I want to do things other than work. And that's really a tendency I notice in a lot of people in my generation in the Netherlands. And that's not a bad thing. I think this is a very good thing, that we no longer join in the machine of capitalism that tells us that we have to work all the time, that we have to make as much money as we can, and that's just the way that the world works. We're kind of cutting loose from this capitalist idea of having to work 40 hours a week at the very least. And I really like that. And this book and this person didn't really seem caught up with that fact yet. That there are some people, that there's a big group of people that specifically chooses not to work full time. And that's not just women, that's men as well. The next book I read was Finding Home Volume 2, The Healer, which is the second volume in another graphic novel that I read on my laptop. I talked about it in my wrap-up in May because I read the first volume then. This is a wonderful graphic novel series about Janek and Chappie, who meet each other while traveling through a forest, and they start to travel together, these strangers, and they become very close. And I think it's a slow burn romance as well. We slowly get to learn more about their past and about who they are. There is a lot of trauma there. There is some mental health issues there, but there's It's mostly just a very wholesome, cozy, wonderful story that I really enjoy, and I gave this volume 5 stars as well. Next up, I reread Turtles All the Way Down by John Green, which is one of my favorite books. I read this when it first came out, pretty soon after it first came out, and I gave it 5 stars then, and I still gave it 5 stars now, and my battery is flashing at me. Well, that's just great. We're going to go through these even quicker. I love this reread. I still love John Green. I love this book. It's great when you want to learn more about anxiety and mental health and OCD. It's perfect. Next up, I read When the Tiger Came Down the Mountain by Nevo, which was an audiobook. I gave it, how many stars did I give it? 4.5 stars. This is the sequel to The Empress of Salt and Fortune. It's kind of a folk tale-esque, fairy tale-like mythological story that's, I think, inspired by ancient China. It was very good. I highly recommend it. It's great storytelling. Go read it. Then I read Period Power by Maisie Hill, which is a non-fiction book about harnessing your hormones and getting your cycle working for you. I gave this 2.5 stars. I did learn a lot from it about my period and about how my body works, but it was a bit too out there for me in certain ways, and the chapter on self-care made me very stressed for a couple of days. It didn't really feel like self-care. It felt like telling me what not to eat, what not to do, and all the ways I'm going to get sick and get cancer, and all the ways I'm mistreating my body. So did not enjoy that. If you want to learn more about your period, I would recommend this, but I'd recommend listening to her podcast more than I'd recommend reading this. If you're sensitive to eating disorders, don't read this. Don't read the chapter on self-care, because I'm not sensitive to it and it really fucked me up. So yeah. Then I read The Obelisk Gate by N.K. Jemisin, which is the second book in the Broken Earth trilogy. The first one is the 5th season, which I absolutely adored. This was another 5-star read for me. This is a sci-fi fantasy speculative fiction story about a world in which catastrophes happen very often, and then at the start of the first book, a very big catastrophe happens that has very big consequences for the people and the world. This world building is unlike anything I've ever seen. It is amazing, it's original, it's groundbreaking, it's probably... And then my battery died. But I was talking about The Obelisk Gate, about how much I loved it. I really can't wait to read The Stone Sky, and I think I will read it in July. Because right now I still feel like I'm really in this story. I'm invested, I still know the intricate details, and that seems like a great time to actually finish this series while I'm still fully invested and fully on a high from this book. And then the last book I finished, we were so close to the end. I really hope that everything was saved on my memory card. But the last book I finished was my reread of Winter by Marissa Meyer. This is a huge book. It's over 800 pages, so I don't know why I decided to read this during the month that I wanted to read 13 books, but I did. I think I read part of it in May already, maybe even a bit in April. No, that's not right. I read part of it in May. I gave this 5 stars. After finishing Cress and being a little bit disappointed with that, Cress being the 3rd book in the Lunar Chronicles and this one being the 5th, the 4th. After 3 comes 4. Like I said, I was a little bit disappointed by Cress. I think I finished that one in March. It wasn't as good as I remembered it to be. I still gave it 4 stars because I love the Lunar Chronicles and it's one of my favorite series. Winter is honestly one of the best finales to a series I have ever read. This was such an adrenaline rush. It's a roller coaster ride from start to finish. These characters, whom I've come to love so much, go through so much, and they have such a unattainable goal, such a bizarre mission to accomplish. And usually when there's such a big unattainable goal, I get a bit annoyed because it feels a bit unbelievable that things happen the way they do. It seems a bit like the stormtrooper thing that they always seem to miss, even though there's a very clear target. That usually seems to happen in fantasy and sci-fi books as well. It's just unbelievable that things go right when there's so many odds stacked against the main characters, but in Winter it all just seemed to fit. A lot of things go wrong. It's clear why they go wrong. It seems like they should go wrong because they're so obviously the underdogs, but then somehow things find a way again, and it's always in a very realistic way. I think there are people who are helping, there are people with very specific skills that we learned about way before they were useful. It's all constructed so perfectly. The ending is wonderful. I just love this. So yeah, I gave this 5 stars. It was a great read. I'm so glad I reread this series. That was so much fun. But that brings me to the end of this wrap up. I'm so glad I managed to read 13 books in June. I had such a good time reading all of these books. So in a comment down below, please let me know what was your favorite book of June. Please like this video if you liked it. Subscribe to my channel if you want to see more of me in the future. And have a wonderful day. Bye!